Good evening, everyone. Let's start the meeting of this. Welcome everyone to the Audit Committee. Andrew, could you do your usual introductions so that everyone knows who everyone is, please?
Okay, Chair, if I'd start with colleagues who are online first. So we've got the Council's external auditors, EY. So we've got Janet Dawson, who's the EY partner, and Hannah Lill, who's a senior manager with EY. Then we've got Graham Cadle, who's the Assistant Director of Finance, and Mark Thompson, who's the Chief Accountant. And then officers that we've got in the room. To my left, we've got Chief Executive Susan Parsonage. Further to my left is Catherine Hickman, the Head of Internal Audit and Investigation. To my right is Madeline Shotland from Democratic Services. And at the far end of the table is Paul Oceanellis, who's the Governance and Risk Manager.
Thank you very much, Andrew. So once again, we've got quite a lot to get through this evening, so I might have to be quite strict with the timings, but I'm confident that we'll get through it all. Do we have any apologies? No. Minutes of the previous meeting, are we all happy that those are a correct record? Can you please show? Thank you. And the actions list from previous meetings has been circulated via email. Did anyone have any comments or queries on the actions list that was circulated? No? Okay, thank you very much. Do we have any declarations of interest? Yes, Stephen.
I really need to check with Andrew if I need to keep doing this, but it's about the corporate risk register, item 52, item 14, just to declare that my wife and I are foster carers, so we're part of that provision.
Okay, thank you very much. Do we have any public or member questions? No. All right, thank you very much. So we'll move on to the first substantive item, which is the audit update. So I'll pass over to Janet. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chair. So yes, a relatively brief paper which really builds on the position that we reported to the last Audit Committee in terms of the national context of what the Department for Levelling Up, Housing and Communities are intending to do. So there's a slight change in their time frame because I think originally we talked to you about the introduction of a backstop date for delayed audits of the 31st of March this year. The department has identified that they hadn't allowed themselves sufficient time to lay the legislation, so consult on the legislation and lay it to be enforced by the 31st of March. So they've moved that backstop date back to the 30th of September, only on the basis of the time required for the legislative process. We, since the last meeting, have also written out to all of the audited bodies where we provide audit services to talk about and set out how we are responding to that in advance of that legislation being put in place, which sets out how we're prioritising the allocation of our resources. And that was pre-Christmas with a view to trying to close as many historic audits as possible before we then focused on closing out the value for money arrangements work across all of our audited bodies, and then starting to move to planning for 23-24 audits, really to try and ensure that we were on the front foot to effect the reset of the audit timetable and timeframe that the legislation changes are designed to put in place. Now, the implication for Wokingham is that whilst at the last meeting we talked to you about the allocation of resources that we had to close the fieldwork out by Christmas, unfortunately we've been unable to complete all of the work that we needed to do by then. You'll also be aware that the pension fund audit and the assurances that we require for that, we're dependent on the Berkshire Pension Fund auditor. And again, there's no further indication in terms of information from them as to when we may get those assurances. And that means that it is very highly likely that we will disclaim the 21-22 audit for Wokingham, focus our resource and effort on the closing out of the value for money work for Wokingham for 21-22 and 22-23, and then work towards a transition for your incoming auditors. And so the report really sets out the background to that. And I understand that may be somewhat frustrating or disappointing for the organisation, but it is in terms of the overall picture of where we are, how we as a firm are unable to allocate further resource to the 21-22 audit to close it out, given the context that we're operating in.
Thank you very much. Okay, any questions or comments from members? Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. I may have further comments, but if I can ask the question first. I understand what you're saying in the report, but at high level, I can't say I'm very happy with that position. I don't think that represents the best interest of the council or our residents to just leave this in the way it is, and particularly as we do now have another 6 months in terms of the government allowance to complete this work. And we were seeing good progress, according to what was said in here before Christmas. So I just wanted to put the question first of all, but I would like to have other comments afterwards, depending upon the response, as to whether there's any opportunities for EY to reconsider this position. And actually, I will talk about the pension stuff separately, because I've got some updates on that. But in terms of the stuff that relates specifically to Wokingham, whether there is a way whereby EY could reconsider and could complete those outstanding actions.
So,
Janet, could you come back on that? Thanks.
Sure, yeah. So we have discussed at length with officers whether or not there was an opportunity to do so. I think the issue that we have is that the amount of work that's required to complete the audit, particularly around the valuations, is not insignificant. And to the point that we made at the last audit committee and in our letter to the organisation, we prioritised and planned resources to allow sufficient time to close that out had we been able to receive all of the information that we required. From the point at which we turned into 2024, the allocation of our resources is now for other priorities, because we anticipated that we would have finished the work. So our allocation of resource is now complete and is fully, our resources are fully allocated out to those priorities set out in the letter, which means that unless some other work were to stall or fail, we have no further resource available to allocate to Wokingham. The point about the 6 months is actually it doesn't give us 6 months more, because we had anticipated finishing by Christmas. The issue that we have now is that we are, allocated to those other areas of priority, but also our other audit commitments. So, and I think I've talked about this in the past, the other public sectors such as the NHS and NAO audits are then fully programmed in, and that's where our audit resource is then committed. So completely understand that on paper it looks as though there's an additional 6 months, but unfortunately that doesn't provide us with 6 months of resource sitting on the bench waiting to complete the audit.
Thank you, Janet. I wasn't entirely unexpecting that response. So let's consider a few things, if we may, then about your company, because I pick up on the fact you're talking about where capacity allows and this constraint upon resource. So according to Statista Research, as of last September, your company had 395,442 employees globally, of which 153,216 were in the EMEA region. And that was an increase in staff of nearly 36,000 on the previous year and 136,197 on the last 2 years. So I do find it quite staggering when you've got that many people involved in your company and within this region that you can't find this extra resource to complete this. That's my first point really on that. And the second thing was that you've pointed out as one of the primary reasons in the appendices here, that it's because it's been further complicated as the key valuer at Carter Jonas has left. Okay, one person, according to Carter Jonas, they have over 1,000 professionals in this country. Why on earth wasn't this on our risk register or yours if this is so dependent upon one person leaving the business that none of the 999 that are left can actually do this? So I could say a lot more on this. I'm extremely disappointed because I would have thought there would be a contract that was in place to deliver this work. And when you look at the values that you put on your website, people who demonstrate integrity, respect, teaming, inclusiveness, people with energy, enthusiasm, and the courage to lead, people who build relationships based on doing the right thing. I have to be honest and say that it doesn't feel to me that, I get you've got challenges. I get that the information couldn't have been provided, but we do have another 6 months, it looks like to me. And therefore, I would ask again, if you could go back to your partners, who I believe, according to Bloomberg, on the average UK partner was earning £761,000 each in 2023. So I do accept that even if you get 5 minutes of their time, it's expensive, that they might reconsider and actually think about the reputation of your company and also the impact to our residents and the reputation of this council by just walking away. Thank you.
Janet, would you like to come back on that?
Yeah, let me do so. So I'm interested in the amount of research that you've done into the firm. The increase in staff is due to the increase in regulatory requirements that affect the audit profession, and so we need more people to meet those regulatory requirements, and that's why we have such an increase. Now, in order to be able to deliver a public sector audit in the UK, we need people in the UK who have met our own clearance standards, who have met our quality training and who have the specialism that is appropriate. And of that, we have 300 in the team. Now, we can easily deliver on our contracts in the year where there is no significant delay that has occurred, which is then requires a double running of audits. It also, the pressure on finance functions, though, to be able to meet that is also significant. And I would argue that your finance team would not be in a position to double run audits to respond to us if we were able to put in double the team to be able to complete your audits. Can't speak for Carter Jonas. I think the question as to why there's such reliance on one individual in Carter Jonas for the council's valuations should perhaps be put back to the council, and whether or not they feel they're getting the service they need from that, and whether they have the specialism that they need to be able to manage that contract. And our contract to deliver is with PSAA, not directly with the council. So, as we've discussed in the past, they are the ones that hold us to account, and they are part of the system that is determining how to reset it and are part of those discussions. We've been talking to them about the approach that we are taking to prioritise delivery of the audits that we can prioritise in the period, and they are, without speaking for them, I think your organisation is going to be in touch with PSA to find out their views on that, but they have raised no issues with us, and we have been completely transparent as to the approach that we're taking with our contract for the 181 audits that we deliver for them.
Thank you, Janet. Before I come back to Stephen, I know Mike wants to come in as well. Can I just ask Graham for the officer view of these proposals, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So just to reiterate Janet's point in terms of Carter Jonas, that is a relationship with the council, and we've been driving them, bearing in mind the time delay and their changing personnel, but that's an issue beyond EY. I think we've been continuing, I think, to work closely with EY. I think there's some things we disagree on because we're bound to in a way in terms of our roles. But there have been some areas on valuations, particularly where it's been difficult to get to information. And historically, we have had areas around valuations that have gone back and forth because of professional judgments between the two organisations. And I don't think we as a council are alone in that. I think I'd say, hopefully fairly, Janet, I think the point that's caught us is we believe we were still working. I know we set a date before Christmas, but we believed we were getting there and there's time beyond Christmas. I think there's areas, like I say, valuations where we have played a role in that, but it's not been a single role in terms of delays. We have spoken to the PSAA, and I've explained that to Janet. They have a copy of the report that's in front of you, and my understanding is they will speak to EY I don't believe they're allowed to tell EY where to put their resource, but they can certainly speak to them, I guess, about whether that focus of EY's resource is on audits that are close to closing and whether we can push ourselves into that bucket. I think, as Janet has explained, the added pressure and difficulty for us is the pensions issue, because even if we complete all of our work, which we would want to, because that gives yourselves and residents kind of comfort in our own accounts, we will be disclaimed because that pensions issue is, I think, highly unlikely or almost definitely unlikely to be resolved. So I think if we'd have been clear of the date, maybe we'd have been able to push that a bit quicker. We would hope EY could put a little bit more resource to still get it over the line, but that pension issue hangs over us. I think that's all the points covered, I think.
Thank you. And just before we go back to members, could we have one other point of clarity on the format of a disclaimed opinion? Because what Graham is saying is, it sounded like we may well end up with a disclaimed opinion on the pension anyway. So what is if Janet could just explain for members, what's the format of a disclaimed opinion, versus a normal audit opinion, please?
So we anticipate that the format of the disclaimed opinion will be prescribed by the department and by the National Audit Office to reference the fact that the audit has not been completed before the backstop date. So, and the guidance that I understand is coming out to wrap around the consultations for the legislation is very much designed to ensure that all authorities who receive a disclaimed opinion as a result of the implementation of a backstop date will be considered really through no fault of their own. So the guidance is designed to ensure that authorities are not prejudged by that or negatively judged by that backstop date disclaimed opinion, that they are not penalised in any way or considered to, from a financial management perspective, that there is, a failure as a result of that. So it's very difficult for me to explain further because actually I'm not in charge of the wording that's coming out from the department, but that is my understanding that that's the intention of ministers and the civil servants.
Thank you. Do you know whether it would mention the areas that have not been completed or?
It's unlikely to mention the areas because I think that you're moving towards more of a limitation of scope audit opinion there, which would then perhaps have an element of judgment associated with it as to whether or not there was further work that could have been done or not. So I think that the intention is that these are fairly standardised opinions.
Thank you. I think Stephen had one more point to make, and then I'll come to Mike and then Mike Drake.
Yeah, sorry, Chair, I'm dominating this, I'm afraid. In terms of the pension piece, let me talk to that, because I raised that at the recent meeting of the Berkshire Pension Fund, just to give the committee an update on that, and indeed EY. They didn't answer my question at the meeting. They just moved on to another question. They refused to answer it, which was the Chair's prerogative, I guess. But he did speak to me privately. And I'm aware this is a public meeting, but I'll say what I was told, and that is that they are not planning to continue with the audit for the pension scheme. They are going to rely upon this September deadline and have it sort of closed out in whatever way it is there. They are not doing any further work on it. In terms of the councils, this is the Royal Borough, Windsor and Maidenhead accounts. Therefore, they will not be able to close out the Berkshire Pension Fund accounts. So we are, no matter what happens with the rest of it, going to be in that position where that will have to be with this dispensation. But I think I'm not content with that. You might have to live with it. But my point is that I'm just thinking that with a little bit more effort, and I can ask Graham's on the line, if EY would reconsider, as I've asked twice now, can Graham give us a commitment that we can provide the resource to get this closed out within a reasonable time, if EY will move on their position a bit so that we can get these other areas closed out? My concern with this as to why I'm pushing this so hard is because I do worry about what the implications are in terms of the starting point for the next audit. Because if you don't have something that you can put a value on, where's your starting point? And it just seems to me that we are quite close. There are a few things that we might have to agree to disagree on and just accept that the auditor's view on it or something. But it does feel that the majority of the work has been done, and it might be possible with a bit of goodwill and focus on both sides that we could indeed complete this within a fairly short time frame and be in a much better position. So I just put that out there again, please.
Thank you. Graham, could you come back on that, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I can give that assurance with the caveat of we're relying on being able to provide the right information for EY to be comfortable. So, for instance, there's a number of areas at the moment where we feel we've provided the right evidence, and there's a disagreement about that. Now, maybe we're not aware of what EY need, or we haven't given the detail around what that information is, but with the caveat of there's some unknowns in there about what is fully required as evidence, we would obviously focus to get that done in the right place. And I think as well would give the assurance of we would put the right governance, I guess, on both sides to make sure that absolutely move forward a rate.
Yeah, may I come in?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Just to make the point that, well, a couple of points. So without the pensions assurance, we will be in a disclaimed position. So we could complete the 21-22 audit, as requested. If we were to complete the 21-22 audit, we would still have a disclaimed opinion, and we would still have a disclaimed opinion on 22-23 because, the statement of accounts has not been fully prepared and shared with us, and the audit has not started for 22-23. So we will still have a disclaimed opinion for 22-23, and the pension fund issue will still be extant for that set of accounts as well. So the point about resetting the audit timeline is actually that it would allow the officers to focus on 23-24 statement of accounts on time now, and for the incoming auditors to move forward with an audit on the timeline, which would then allow you to have, the completion of that audit within the 2024 calendar year. And just to Graham's second point about the governance arrangements on both sides, without being too emotive, the only word that comes to mind is the tragedy of this is that I think we've got to a position where we've got a really strong, open working relationship with Graham and Mark and their team. However, we don't have the resource now to allocate, and we have this pensions issue that's outstanding, which then puts us in a very difficult position to be able to move forward. Were we staying as your auditors, I think we would be in a really strong position to move that relationship and that working together forward. And that's the sadness in terms of how far the relationship has come. However, we will do everything we can to make sure that the transition to the new auditors is as smooth as possible.
Thank you, Janet. Mike.
Thank you. I've no doubt that the statements we've heard this evening have been very carefully scrutinised by your legal experts to make sure that what you can effectively doing is downing tools and walking away from it. If there are 918 outstanding audits, then clearly something is catastrophically wrong with the whole concept of what is effectively the privatised version of the National Audit Commission. I do note, having asked the officers to do some digging, that the fees charged in 2013-14 were actually more than the fees being charged now. So clearly there's much less resource being applied. Now, I appreciate that we, Wokingham Borough Council, have no control over who's allocated to do the auditing. But I assume in the negotiations between these major auditing companies and the PSAA that there is some discussion about resources needed and some agreement. So I'm not quite sure, having worked 30 years in the construction industry, that the excuse we've used all the resources for the price we're getting paid and we're not doing any more is a very acceptable way forwards. We also don't understand what's changed in the valuations to make things so much more complicated. I'm not aware that the council has acquired a whole load more assets of dubious value that need looking at. So I don't think much has changed in the last 2 or 3 years. And I'm left wondering, well, if we're walking, or if, as my colleague, Councillor Newton has indicated, that effectively the Maidenhead council's auditors are just downing tools and waiting until the point where the government effectively wipes the slate clean as far as they're concerned, that we are going to get lumped in, having done a bloody good job over the last 2 years of trying to make sure that our finances are well managed. We're going to get lumped in with all those councils that perhaps haven't been quite so diligent or quite so fortunate as not having a decent set of accounts. I'm really disappointed in this, and I'm astonished that what effectively seems to me is that people are just downing tools and walking away because it's all become a bit too much difficult.
Thanks. If I could just comment on that before we go to perhaps Janet and Graham. I think, as Janet said earlier, there's no negative judgment on us as a council if we go down this route of disclaimed opinion. And this is very much a sector-wide issue. We're not alone in terms of the delay. That is why this is all happening, because there's such a delay in the sector. So for me, it comes down to assurance that we gain as a committee from having a really good audit that's then signed off. I think that's the issue from our point of view. But can I come to Janet? Did you want to come in on anything that Mike was saying? Oh, and also just to add to because Mike was asking about the valuations and the issue there. Could I also ask what the issue was with the cash and cash equivalents? Because that's often an easier area to audit, I would have thought. So could you explain what the issues were there with the delays in information? Yeah. Thank you.
Sure. So just on the valuations point, the council changed the valuer that they were using. So clearly that means that we need to have a look at the methodology, the approach, the skills, etc. And the methodology from valuer to valuer is different. And therefore, we've had to go back and understand how that valuer has performed their work. Now, unfortunately, some of the answers that we were getting in terms of, what benchmarks have you used, what market information have you used, what underlying input data have you used, we weren't getting the answers to those questions from the valuer. And Carter Jonas was, as I understand it, struggling to find somebody else who could provide those answers, given that the valuer who had done the work was no longer with the organisation. In terms of cash and cash equivalents, Hannah, I don't know whether you want to just come in on that in terms of the difficulties there.
Yes, thank you, Janet. Yes, there have been some issues in the listing that the council hold of the signatories for all of the bank accounts held at all the different schools that are within the council's remit. And we've been working hard with officers to try and make sure that we have the right information. But for the current process to be able to obtain a bank confirmation letter means that the relevant signatories have to authorise the process, and that has been a significant hold up in just trying to get those confirmations.
Okay, thank you. Mike Drake.
Thank you, Rachel. I don't know where to start. Frankly, I'm absolutely astonished at the state of local authority auditing and, to be honest, council financial reporting. How on earth have we got into this situation? I think it looks very poorly on the accountancy profession, for SIPFA, and I'd be interested on any comments they've had on the ministerial announcement. As far as EY, I've spent most of my career working for the big firms and also in industry. And frankly, if you're in a PLC and you have such a situation, the firms have thousands of employees. They find the resource. So I find it astonishing that auditors, even in the commercial side, can't move across to work on local authority audits. January is the biggest and the busiest time. That's now completed for the firms. So there is resource out there. I think it's probably a matter of will, I'm afraid. I agree with some of the other comments mentioned. Also, my understanding is we have completed, or EY have completed a lot of the work
And although I understand the conversation about disclaimer, surely it would look better for us as a borough finance department if we said, look, the audit was just subject to these limitations in pensions and evaluations, because everything else is okay. So I do find the approach very, very concerning. And overall, on top of this is a period when council's in a period of financial stress. Yet the auditors are going to say, we disclaim opinion on all the numbers. The time is incredible, and I think there's been a lack of will, and a lot of it probably comes from central government through ignorance, the fact they're only giving 6 months, and it's much more than an EY point. I think Chair, if it's okay, I think we should be looking at what this disclaimer opinion is. We should review that, have an opportunity. And I think I'll probably stop there because I think it's deeply, deeply concerning.
Thank you, Mike. Can I bring in Sandeep as well?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I can only echo all the comments that have been said earlier. I've never seen anything like this. It's absolutely shocking and surprising. And I would underline the request to reconsider on behalf of EY. The 2 points that I would make, I suppose, taking learnings forward, we had a meeting on the 29th of November, if I'm not mistaken. At that point in time, I did not realise that we could ever end up in this situation here, and that was 2 months ago. So I don't know if there's a communication point there around, how it was discussed in terms of update from last time. But also the other point that I'd make is, if I remember correctly, there were some performance issues on the EY side that caused some of the delay, just adding to the goodwill point that might help EY reconsider. But yeah, just echo the disappointment and the shock, quite frankly, at ending up in this situation.
Thank you, Sandeep. Janet, did you want to come back?
I think just on the performance point, we were very clear in the last meeting that we had dealt with that ourselves and that we had identified additional resource and that we had agreed a programme to complete the fieldwork by the end of December with officers. So I'm slightly at a loss as to why that wasn't clear, given that we reported it in our report last time and discussed how we had dealt with that, and that was accepted by the committee if I look back at the minutes of that meeting. In terms of the point around how did we end up here and the references to the Audit Commission, the department, the system, I could refer you back 5 years to the call for a review, which was delayed and then undertaken by Redmond, about how the system has got into this position and the additional requirements of the regulators, but also the impact of austerity on finance functions, not necessarily your own, but finance functions in terms of being able to produce accounts that meet the requirements, the increased reporting requirements. There's factors at every level that have resulted in this pressure, which means that there are insufficient resource, both on the finance function side across local authorities, but also within audits to meet the increased regulatory and reporting requirements. Redmond covered that. We have been flagging it as audit firms for 2 years with the department, and this is how long it has taken to get to this point. So it's not for want of trying to ensure that we have a solution to move forward.
Thank you, Janet. Stephen?
Sorry, I'm going to come back again. Thank you, Chair. I get the issue that there are certain things that are outside of this council and EY's control, and we've identified the pensions. It looks like this valuations on the property may also be in that camp, but it does feel that there are other things which are within our control, and maybe there was thinking about the schools. Maybe that's something that's outside our control. But it seems that the other bits are within our control and are quite close to being resolved. And there was a lot of movement on this. So what I'm wondering is, we've got the chief executive, we've got Graham here. And I just wonder if we can ask them if EY would be willing to reconsider this. Can they commit to providing the resource and the governance and the support for this to actually get the other areas across the line in a timescale that is mutually agreed with EY, so that we can achieve the best possible outcomes on audit and only have the things that are out with our control that are going to be, was it disclaimed, I think was the term, wasn't it? So that we limit the impact of this and move forward in the best possible position that we can. So can I ask that of the officers, please, before we come to EY to see, because if the officers can't commit to it, it becomes academic.
Graham, I think you already had a go at a similar question, but did you want to come back?
Yeah, so, well, look, I think we can. There are some areas with valuations, for instance, where our valuers professionally said their view is X, and we believe we provided some information of why it's X, and EY needs some more information. I'll just use that as one example. So we can put together the resources to try and provide that. However, the caveat is we can only provide reasonable information. So in the past on values, for instance, we've got to a point where we've said there are some professional differences because two sets of values have a slightly different view. So if there can be that level of pragmatism where there's a gap, then we can absolutely commit to that.
Thank you. Any other comments? Mike?
Yeah, I've just been looking at the minutes that Janet referred to earlier, saying that she thought it was clear. And the point I'll pick out is the audit's not been completed primarily as a result of two factors. Firstly, performance issues with the member of EY staff. Second factor being the delay with the ongoing discussions about valuations. If I search that document electronically, the word disclaim doesn't appear. So I don't think this committee did have any foregoing knowledge that this was likely to happen. There was some comments about the Department of Levelling Up Housing and Committees was the announcement still awaiting. So this seems to me, this has come as a shock that we're going to end up with an invalid audit, or at least media may well say all these councils have not bothered to do their job properly. They can't be audited, and that it really concerns me.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask the committee for any proposals as to how we go forward? This report is just for us to note. There's no recommendations, but does anyone have any proposals for how we take this forward and being engaged in this?
I think Mike provided the guidance that we should follow. I mean, that seemed like the most sensible suggestion, is that we put that and mandate that the officers work towards achieving that. I'm assuming the Audit Committee has the power to mandate officers to do this, or at least ask them. Can we mandate them?
May
We
I
can mandate officers to do anything.
may I?
Yes, Graham.
So Janet hopefully agrees with this. The relationship with EY contractually is through the PSAA. So our lever, if that's the right word, in terms of resources or any activity, has to be through those. I have spoken to them at some length, and as I think I said earlier, have passed this this report, and in fact most of the comments you've said about us being so close, the importance for us locally, even if pensioners is still outstanding. My understanding is that they will speak to EY, but they only have an ability to advise, I think, and then it's up to EY. And the reason they gave to me was because they can't be in a position to impact other audits negatively, I think that's what they said. So I think in terms of both our ability to influence and the appropriate next step would be maybe for something a little bit firmer to the PSAA around their concerns and whether they can leverage something further.
The capacity of chief executive, but it just seems incredible to us if most of the work is finished, other than two areas, that the disclaimer opinion can't just refer to those two areas. At the end of the day, we've still got to produce the accounts. We've still got all the numbers in there. Presumably EY will still look at those numbers and look at the financial reports. I assume you literally aren't going to walk away. If you are, one would hope there'll be a reduction in audit fees for this year and next year. But putting that aside, I do wonder, sort of mirroring what Peter said as well, that that's maybe what we should be aiming for. Thank you.
Thank you. Susan, did you want to come in?
So what I can do is I'll speak to Graham, obviously after the meeting, and look to submit something based on the conversation that I have with Graham.
Okay, I want to draw this to a close fairly soon, but Stephen and Mike for last comments, please.
Thank you. Hopefully this class comments. I just wonder if we could have a vote on a recommendation, a request really, that we agree that to ask Janet to formally go back to the partners at EY to request that they do reconsider their position. So we make that a formal request of EY so that we can end the relationship in a really positive way and end up with as good an audit as is possible. So I would just like to formally ask that we might better move that so that there is a formal request to EY to relook at this.
Thanks. I don't think, from what we've heard, I don't think we can instruct EY in that manner because it doesn't. It goes through the PSA. Can't say it, PSA. So I'm not sure that is quite right. But I think, in terms of there's been some very strong opinions this evening that I'm sure Janet will have heard. And I mean, personally, I think if members are happy for me to liaise closely with Graham and Susan in terms of the liaison on the PSAA communications and feedback to the committee, I think that would be the best way forward if members are happy with that, because I just don't think we can do that instruction piece in terms of.
It was a request.
Well, we can vote on a request if you want to provide some wording then of a proposal.
Yeah, it's a request for EY to reconsider closing the audit at this stage and to look at providing some additional resource to allow all of the areas that can be closed out, recognising that certain ones won't be able to be, but to complete everything that is possible within a reasonable time frame, working in conjunction with the officers.
Do I have a seconder for that? Okay, and all those in favour? Okay, thank you. Right, any other points on this before we close? So, Mike, sorry.
I did have a technical query, which probably demonstrate my ignorance as I'm an engineer, not an audit, not an accountant. In the fieldwork completed in review, it says actuarial gains and losses and pension scheme testing has been completed. Does that not give us an assurance that the pension scheme is okay? What is it we're precisely looking for from Deloitte's? If we've actually checked that the actuarial gains and losses are okay and this pension scheme is okay.
Janet, could I ask you to answer that one?
Yeah, sure. So there are two elements of the work. One is the disclosures that you're required to include within your accounts, and that is what we're referring to in terms of do those disclosures tie back in terms of the actuarial gains and losses back to the information that you have to support that, but then the underlying assurance over the numbers reflected in there, the work is done by the pensions auditor, and we then receive that assurance from them. So what we've done is what you've disclosed, but we haven't got the underlying assurance over the numbers.
Okay, Mike, yeah.
So if I go back to an audit meeting or two, my recollection was that the Deloitte had actually completed the pension scheme audit, which was fine. It was the fact they can't finalise the overall accounts for the Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead, which was holding everything up. And I thought at the end of the day, to finalise the 2021 audit, we did actually get a letter which more or less said that. Can we not get the same out of them this time?
Janet?
No, we can't. That's the problem. So we have the assurance for the 2021 audit numbers, but we don't have the assurance for the 21-22 audit numbers or the 22-23 audit numbers. So there are two open years.
And if it helps members, you'll remember that last year we'd got all the way with everything apart from pensions, and I think we're stuck for nearly a year waiting on the letter, which they give a letter, but with a number of caveats, didn't they, which don't give the right level of assurance, unfortunately, until that work's complete.
Yeah, and complicated this year by the fact that, or for 21-22, that there was a triennial valuation revaluation of the pension fund as at the 1st of April 2022, which needs to be reflected into the 21-22. So we actually asked Deloitte to do more work for this open year of accounts. So we haven't got the assurance letter and we haven't got the triennial testing work either.
Thank you. And one last point from Mike, please.
Really, I'd just remind the committee, we did discuss this before, and I mentioned that most companies who report their pensions, particularly with very tight timescale, pension numbers are not audited. The actuary prepares them. And those are the numbers that go in prelims and actually in annual reports as well. So it's rather unusual actually to have to wait for accounts to be audited, pension fund accounts. And I think from memory, EY, we're going to have a look at their audit approach and whether they could rely on actuarial evaluation like most public limited companies would in defined benefit schemes.
Thank you for that. I'd like to draw this to a close now, but suffice to say, it is a very disappointing situation. I think the committee as a whole, very strong views that the committee isn't satisfied with where we have ended up at the moment. And, we look forward to further updates in liaison with Graham and Susan and the PSAA as to where we can go with this. But hopefully that's clear that the committee is not satisfied with where we are currently. Okay, thank you everyone for that. We will move on to the next item now, which is the corporate risk register. And I think Susan is going to introduce this one. Thank you, Susan.
Thanks, Chair. So I'm hoping that everybody's got a copy of the risk register in front of them. In terms of the top corporate risks, the 4 corporate risks are budget, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, cybersecurity, adult social care and SEND. So in terms of the changes to the risks, so 2.1 in your report talks about the update on the financial risk and the fact that we are on course to deliver a balanced budget. However, this is against significant savings, and I think there's more detail that you've been provided with regards to that, or certainly there's a reference in the report to that as well in terms of the financial risks. Another risk that actually has been included in the risk register is the one around the Procurement Act 2023. And that relates to the fact that public procurement rules are changing. So there's a lot of work that's taking place to prepare for, excuse me, when that change takes place. Excuse me. So the implementation will lead up until October 24. So this is an important one for the corporate leadership team. So we've had a report on this to the corporate leadership team, which of course I chair, and so we have a close eye to ensure that we'll meet all of the new responsibilities that we have. Another risk that's changed is one that's been updated around the local plan. So since we last met, the government have actually published the new MNPPF, and in this report it talks about the impact of some of the decisions the government have made. We were hoping that passed over delivery could actually be incorporated into future delivery, but unfortunately that is not the case, that passed over delivery will not be permitted in calculating future housing numbers. So that was something that was key that came out of the changes that the government have indicated. The risk to 9, the climate emergency, I think that this has been changed, and this was based on what you actually said that you wanted, and that is the fact that the risk has changed to focus on the delivery of the council's climate emergency action plan. So that has been changed accordingly in accordance with your requirement. And so there's information about that. And there's been some changes around the adult and children safeguarding. So the risk target has been increased around those two and adjusted. So that it's really, as it says in your report, recognising that the risk of harm to children, young people and adults, where the local authority is actually holding the safeguarding responsibility can't be completely eliminated. So it's really that is, and it remains a controlled risk, albeit high. And the next risk that we've talked about in the report is one around education, where there's been a change, where there's been a reduction, there's really been some really good news in terms of the fact that Forest School is going co-educational. So that makes a big difference, makes a difference in terms of school places, etc. as well. And in terms of the elections, Andrew and I were talking about this just before the start of the meeting, that the risk around that has been reduced. That again, this has been aside from all the work that Andrew and his team have been doing, this has been a priority for corporate leadership team as well. You know, we've had reports on this, and we've made it a priority to ensure that, or to promote with all of the staff, to ensure that we've got people from the teams who are actually taking part in the elections. So, but I know it's a lot more than that because it was a huge amount of work, but it's good to see that risk has actually reduced. And what the report talks about as well is about some of the scanning that we've done, horizon scanning, to look at how our risk register compares to other risk registers. I think that was something that you raised at this group, and also benchmarking with other authorities in Berkshire. And that it didn't, for example, the local benchmarking did not identify any sort of new risks that we needed to include. So it's really just to assure you that, you know, we are actually looking, horizon scanning and benchmarking to ensure that we're not really missing anything. So those are the main points really that I wanted to raise. Obviously, you've got the actual, the more detail about the different risks, and if you have any questions.
Thank you. Mike, to start us off.
Okay, thank you. First point, there seems to be more in a typographical error, because you refer to risk 25 as being the Procurement Act related risk, but in the chart it's actually risk 26. I assume that can be picked up for that's a minor issue. What I didn't quite understand was why risk 7, the adult social care supply sustainability and sufficiency chart, is not included, especially as it's one of the 4 key risks. And also, this might explain why the numbering's got a bit odd. Risk 16 and risk 23 also seem to have disappeared off the list of risks. Unfortunately, I can't remember what they are. They're going back.
Yeah, 16 and 23 are risks that are no longer on the risk register and have been deleted, but I haven't renumbered them.
It'd be helpful if we could have that in the report, just it'd be easy there. Somewhere I didn't spot it.
Yeah. One of them was the website replacement, if you remember that risk. Yep. That one's
remember that going, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. With regards to this Procurement Act 23, I think you make the point in the text that case law will have to be developed. So there's quite a long period of time between the look back coming into place and anything that's actually happening. But would it be useful if you could provide a briefing to councillors generally about what the aspects of this, if it's not already planned?
Yeah, it's really interesting, because when I was looking at the risk register before, I was thinking that doing something more broadly would be really useful. So I think absolutely we should do that. So we could take that away around the procurement, changes to procurement. Something else that just struck me as well, as you raised then, Councillor Smith, about the numbering. I think that absolutely the numbering needs to be changed, and I wonder if we can just have a bit of a log as to what's come off the register, so that you can see. So it's there as a bit as an appendix, if you like, so you can see what's moved off, so you don't have to keep on thinking. So what was it?
That would be excellent, because you have the will to go back and see the previous assessments. The third point I wanted to make, my understanding of the housing numbers that comes out of the algorithm set by central government is advisory, but the chances of you overturning an advisory figure with the inspector is nil. What I didn't quite understand was the second paragraph underneath that, which said that it's about planning application process and presumption, etc., and tilted balance, etc. outlining the MPF applied when the most relevant policy for determination are out of date. The government has indicated past delivery can be taken into account. Why would the most relevant policies of determination go out of date?
I think that with this particular point, there is the point that we've got to have further guidance from the government on this,
Yeah.
and I think I'd probably like you to be provided with a little bit more information here from planning about what we're actually saying here. So
I did read it about 10 times. I'm not sure I understood it.
yeah. So we just need, we need a bit of clarity on that. So if I can get some written clarity for you, because it's clear about the broader point about the fact that passed over delivery is not taken into account. However, as you say,
the advisory figure is actually mandatory.
Yes,
the word mandatory.
But we'll get. I think if we get a little bit of clarification on this paragraph for you.
I would say, I mean, the planning department did a very excellent briefing session a month or 3 weeks ago, where some of this was explained. It's that's sliding through. Okay, thank you. I'll let somebody else have a go.
Thank you. What was the answer on risk 7? Sorry, in terms of, is that missing? Yeah. Okay. The check. Okay. Right. So we can find out about that one. Sandeep.
Thank you, Chair. I just had a question on risk 3, which was workforce. So understanding the challenges that exist across many industries and functions, is there a good understanding around critical functions and roles, just to have a targeted action when things do arise as it relates to workforce, or is it fairly general approach?
So if I can take one example, so we have, for example, around children's sort of social workers, that we absolutely do have a targeted approach around that. We have particular campaigning and really think about where we sort of target our efforts. So there is we do take different approaches, because one of the challenges, say for example, around that is that if we don't address it, it drives up our agency costs, because we have to have social workers to cover our cases, and to ensure we keep our cases at a reasonable level. So it's really important that we do seek to recruit in a timely way and have that targeted approach. So yes, in answer to your question, yes, we do. So there are a number of areas so planning is one area where we're difficult to recruit, and adults and children's social care, for example, are other areas. We are also talking to our colleagues, when I say colleagues, in terms of local authority colleagues in Berkshire around this, because it cuts across, as you would expect, all local authorities in Berkshire, and really thinking with universities like Reading University about, can we take sort of different approaches here in terms of creating a pipeline, and other universities too. So it's something that, as I say, that we are really think about how we might take different approaches.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it's just a prioritisation point, but thank you. Okay, and then the second and final point that I had was on risk 19, information governance. I noticed one of the mitigating actions is overdue. I just wondered if that had a dependency or a link to cybersecurity in any way, and if that risk assessment should change.
But there's no direct link to that. It's a fair spot that it is overdue, but we do have a current acceptable use policy. So the issue is that it's not been updated relatively recently, but I don't think it exposes or increases the risk around cybersecurity in any direct way.
Okay, thank you.
Mike Drake.
Thank you. I thought it was another very good, clear report, Paul and Andrew. So it does explain the risk very clearly, which is excellent. Just a couple of questions, really, but nothing major. We mentioned about the balanced budget. I assume that's 24, 25. Are we talking a year? So I think I forget these things as I get older, but I think previously we were looking, was it about 7 million loss, or was it even more than that at one stage?
Shall I come?
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
So in terms of the position, we've got in-year pressures, which we're mitigating, and then of course we've got the the need to present a balanced budget for 24-25 onwards. So there's those 2 year, those two sort of distinct things, if you like.
You can balance by having a gap of cost cutting you've got to find. Okay. Second point, on the Procurement Act, are there any penalties on the council if we don't fully comply? That's the second question.
I must admit, I don't know the answer to that. I don't know whether Graham may know the answer to that one.
Yeah, I do. Well, so I do. So all the details of that have not been detailed as yet. So as far as we're aware, there's not. I think the bigger risk at the moment is for the main projects putting in place performance indicators, and they have to be published, and there will be a central body looking over performance and picking up with providers where they're not performing and potentially stopping them from winning other work. So at the moment, the risk feels more with them and then the relationships with us as a result. But the full detail we expect to come out in the coming months, and there's nothing at the moment that indicates penalties.
And then the final point was really perhaps to reduce the work of the guys here presenting risks. I did wonder whether risks 24 and 25 were more sort of a director level risk. This is, I know there are large procurement contracts, but it is sort of the day-to-day work of a procurement department. And we've written that they're fairly low risk for us as well. So I wonder really whether they're really directorate rather than audit committee risk. That's the final question.
Something for you to consider, I think, on that. I mean, with the waste collection one is that there's such a lot of, public interest in that it might be sensible to retain it for that reason. But something for you to consider anyway. Other points. So actually, I think Stephen was first, and then Peter, and then Mike.
Thank you, Chair. If I can just echo what Mike Drake said. I thought this was a really good report. So well done for that, because it really did help to crystallise the points and bring our attention to the right things. And I think probably to Councillor Smith's point, on the update on point 4, you could have gone into an awful lot more detail and when do you end it? So I think it's a good point that the Chief Executive made, that we'll get a separate paper on that. It was to do with that risk. I just wanted to comment because I'm not close to this at all in terms of my role within the council. But I was just a bit disappointed to see this in terms of the outcome, because I thought what I was seeing previously was that the headline announcements that were being made by the minister were suggesting for quite some time now that the passed over provision would be taken into account. And I don't know because I'm not involved in it, but one would assume that maybe officers and members would be working along that way. Then to suddenly find at the 11th hour that it's not what is been headlined from the minister and in what's actually published, that could impact the work that's been done. So I just wanted to sort of be a bit disappointed in that, and hopefully we haven't wasted a lot of time and effort on that one by being sort of led down one way and then finding that it's different to what it is. I mean, I don't expect a comment on that. I'm just sort of noting that as a disappointment. It's outside of our control anyway. But no, good document is where I'm coming from. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter.
Just wanted to talk about number 9, which is a climate emergency action plan. So obviously I mentioned this at the last meeting, and we had a separate meeting, Chair, with the climate emergency action team to discuss my concern about scope management. So I guess I'm satisfied at the moment that it's not expanding beyond the original scope, but we did at that meeting discuss how reports that come to main council for noting rather than being voted on was a concern. So just raising that at this point so that we perhaps can get the message across that there are some reports that come to council for noting, which in this case had a significant change of scope of delivery for the project, but it wasn't there to be voted on and debated. So the discussion we had was that we would strongly recommend that there's better review of what goes to council to have a better understanding of what should be voted on properly rather than just noting.
Did you want to come back on that?
That's fine, fair point. So thank you.
Thank you. And Mike? I think Stephen's already, yeah.
Okay, just to pick up on Stephen's point, actually, because I'm a bit closer. The broken promise means we've got to add 15% more numbers. We've got to find 15% more space for housing in the borough, in the local plan. I was actually looking at 2.5 and 2.6, which are pretty much exactly the same text. So we've got adult safeguarding, we've got children safeguarding. I just wonder whether there's an opportunity to combine it into a single risk, if it's because it's the same value in terms of likelihood and severity. Appreciate the mitigating actions are somewhat different, but I just wondered whether there was an opportunity to consider. I know they're two different departments, two different costs, but
I think, given the nature of what we're talking about in terms of risk and the different, adults and children, notwithstanding the, there is some crossovers, I think it would be preferable to keep it like that for now, separate. And because we're talking about distinct populations, if you like, and different types of risk, albeit that the safeguard is the word is the same, safeguarding, but we're talking about the risks are quite different in terms of how they materialise for those different populations. So if we keep it separate for now, but keep an eye on it in terms of actually thinking about how we, whether we should bring it together. I appreciate what you're saying, that what we've said in the report is the same, but I think
I appreciate
the risks are different.
I was just wondering, because if fundamentally the two different departments are having to achieve the same thing, is there synergy about much closer working together?
Yeah, and I think that what I would say about that is by bringing children's and adults together, that was the structural change that's been made under one executive. So that's happened, and that happened last year. Lost track of time now, probably around September. The reason behind that was to actually see where we've got synergies and where we could align things. Then we should do that. I think that the greater challenge around safeguarding is that we've got a safeguarding adults board, which is for Berkshire West, 3 local authorities. We've got a safeguarding children's board, again for Berkshire West, and so you've got those quite separate approaches. But the point you're making is absolutely right. We should and are looking at where we can align things and where we can learn, where the departments can learn from each other. So you're absolutely right to raise that.
Thank you.
Any other update?
Yeah, thank you. I think of particular interest to my constituents around the EU update, but more about how it's been handled. So in September, it was presented here as being on track for a November delivery, 2 months later, at which point the government's NPPF had not been updated. In December, it was also reported in the Corporate Risk Register as being on track for November, which it clearly wasn't because it hadn't been published and we were meeting. And now in February, it's on track for a May delivery. Now, the problem here is there's no effective tracking of whether something was on track or not. And this is one risk I am particularly interested in because I'm in a ward, I actually live near a Hall Farm in the ward most likely to be impacted by the LPU. However, it does concern me that the way that other risks are being tracked does not have effective governance. Now, I can accept that there are mistakes, and we agreed that in December there was an error that it had been included as in November and on track. However, to now come and have May as just a revised date gives me no faith that the dates aren't going to just move without being reported to this committee. And indeed, in the update, it does talk about the NPPF being delayed, coming in December. However, if we're to believe what we heard in September, as in September, it was expected to be published in November. And at that point, the NPPF hadn't been published. We should say, OK, you need 2 more months. I mean, it is well known that item 3 of the consultation was highly unlikely to be included, and that was being previewed, I believe, back in August. So yes, that's not been included, the over delivery. But it's more of a general point. I mean, how can we have faith in how these deadlines are being recorded, reported, and moved to this committee, because there's one example here where it clearly hasn't been governed properly or correctly.
Susan?
I think that what we could do is, alongside the information that I've said could be clarified about the not including the past development on one side, but then we've got a particular example where it is. I think alongside that, what we could do is actually do some feedback to you about the governance side of things and around the local plan and the points that you're making, and actually
Okay, so the local plan is just an example where we've had a date move from November on track to November on track when it's past due already to now February on track. Sorry, May, apologies, after the elections. Now, the problem there for me is that whilst there is a narrative that says, oh, the NPPF's just been published, it doesn't say, and we've moved the date. It doesn't say to this committee, we have missed a deadline for whatever reason. But the corporate risk register contains deadlines, and our job is to scrutinise that they're being met. Now, they may be agreed to be moved, and that is your prerogative, and I completely support that you manage the corporate risk register, but we need to be informed where things have been moved. Otherwise, what's the point of showing a delivery date, because it can change in the next meeting anyway without us being told.
I don't know if there's a way of presenting it differently where this happens.
I would suggest if any
such that it's more transparent that yeah. I mean, I
audits to this committee between two, and this promise of monthly.
I would just say on that, I think one of the strengths of this is that it's very clearly laid out and it's not cluttered. So I wouldn't want, I wouldn't want that to change, but I do also accept that the point. So Susan, if that's something that you can take forward in terms of how we have that transparency when things do change in that way.
Of course, absolutely, because I don't know if Andrew, did you want to come?
Well, yeah, just very briefly, I can see Paul's itching to get in, but I think it's a fair point in terms of how we present, because I think we have been a bit inconsistent, because Sandeep picked up the point about information governance and that deadline that had passed and what were the issues around that, but we've perhaps not done the same with this particular risk. So we'll look at the consistency of how we report.
Yeah, because it was going through my mind that I was thinking, I'm sure that we'd said on other occasions with other things that where a deadline had been missed, but like you say, the issue is it's not consistent. So we just need to ensure the consistency. That's fine.
Paul, did you want to come in? Sorry.
Yeah, I think the issue, just to reassure you that the deadline dates don't move apart from this one, that is particularly caught us out, because the narrative in the report should have highlighted that date had moved. What happens is if we do need to move a date, the existing date goes, and it goes either overdue, like the information governance one, or it'll turn it into amber to be some issues it's not happening, and then it should have been in the narrative of the report, and I apologise that it's not in there. But the general approach that we take is if we move any of the dates, they should be put in the narrative of the report.
Mike, did you want to come in?
I was going to suggest exactly the same thing, that where in the narrative report we note any changes in risk, we just have a paragraph noting any completion dates that have changed. So it doesn't change the format of the report.
Thank you. Could you turn your microphone on? Thank you. And Mike?
Actually, just to build on that, I mean, in the top right-hand corner of the charts, we have a box that says change, which actually only relates to the risk itself. Has it increased in likelihood or severity? Perhaps we could have two lines, one about risk and severity and the other one about timeline. Or if what Paul has just said, that it's only this one risk that's happened to, and it's very rare, then perhaps we don't need that.
Okay, Paul, yeah.
Yeah, just to reiterate, any changes in the mitigating action dates should be noted in the narrative report.
Thank you. I just had a couple of points to raise. On the cybersecurity, can we have fewer acronyms in that one? Because there's a lot of acronyms in there, and I don't know what they all mean. So Then on adult social care risks, I wanted to raise the social care future movement. So many of us that were at full council at the last meeting were, I think, really captivated by the presentations from both those in receipt of care and also carer. And and we need to obviously take note of that. And I think we can be quite arrested by some of that presentation. It's not mentioned in here, so I'm just wondering if it's that's something that is relevant to the risks in here, or whether it's because this is really looking at our statutory duties and it's kind of a different focus. But perhaps that's something that might be worth referencing in terms of moving forward and what our sort of controls are in future actions. Secondly, just a point of clarity in terms of Care Quality Commission assessments. Has there been a change in those assessments in terms of local authorities? Is there a risk for us around that? That's just for my understanding.
So on that, it is expected that we will actually be inspected, and we had recently had a peer review to ensure that we are fully prepared when the formal inspection takes place. So that helps provide a level of assurance that we're on the right path. So that's in terms of the inspection side of things, that's what's happening with adult safeguarding. I think your point around the work that we're doing with carers and actually the users of our service is a really important one, and the joint work that we're doing. So absolutely, I'll take that away.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions on the risk register? No? Okay, thank you very much. The next item we have is the internal audit progress report. So I'll hand over to Catherine. Thank you, Catherine.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and good evening, everybody. This is my regular progress report to Audit Committee on the work of the Internal Audit and Investigation Service. I brought the Q2 progress report to committee back in November, and this updates progress now until the end of December. I know you're familiar with the format of the report, so I'll just give you some of the key updates in there. As Appendix A1, pages 75 to 78, this lists all the audit work that was undertaken up until the end of December. And that includes all the audits that have been finalised, those at draft report stage, work in progress, and those not yet started. And I've highlighted in yellow where there has been movement since the Q2 progress report, just to make it easier to reference. In terms of high-risk concerns identified from the audit work, these are summarised on pages 68 to 70. There have been no new high-risk concerns since I last reported. The tables in the report just update you on the progress and the outcome of our follow-up work on those high-risk concerns. There have been no new audits in the period that have resulted in the lowest category of audit opinion, that's category 3 or 4. And this audit report is really coming to committee this evening for you to review and scrutinise the work up until the end of the Q3 period. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Catherine. Questions, comments from the committee? Mike, yep.
Yeah, it's just to understand, the table on page 65 is risks as of November 23, but it doesn't include risks 23, 24, 25 and 26. I don't know whether it's just the page is running out of space.
No, so
to do that, or whether there are no audits relative to
right. So
that.
This actual report is a progress on the 23-24 audit plan. So these are the key corporate risks that we will actually cover during that 23-24 year. The next report, which is the audit plan report, that has a table in it, and I can refer you to that when we come to it if you like. But that has a 3 years of risks and when we're going to be auditing which ones.
Okay, thank you. And on the table on page 67, it said so shows the total number of high concerns 23, 24, 22, 23, 21, 22, and their status is open closed. And this 3 notes is not yet due. but that's summed to 18, which I assume is the figure 18 that appears in the box below, which says the number of new audits raised since the last AC, the number of high risk concerns that are open or overdue. But you've counted in that 3 that are not yet due.
Yeah, this is just showing the position at the end of the previous audit committee and this audit committee, so they don't actually reconcile across as such. So what we're trying to say here is, in terms of compared to the last audit committee, the 4 concerns that were not yet due, 1 was due between then and now, and so it's just 3 that are not yet due.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Oh, sorry.
So I've not seen that before. I thought we'd have 2 at the same time, just not me. So just on the COO, particularly recruitment, safe recruitment, and the service agreements and the recruitment retention policies, I presume the existing policies have not yet been superseded and therefore are audited. So we are covered, but we know there are new ones coming. Is that correct?
Yes, the old policies are still in place, but I know they're looking at the processes and procedures and updating them all and refreshing them. So they wanted us to give an audit input on those new processes, but they weren't ready to be audited at the time. And we'd want them to sort of embed a little bit first as well. So.
Mike Drake.
Just got one point on page 70 under reconciliations, probably before my time on the committee because it's 21-22. But if it's general finance reconciliations, I'm a bit surprised the target date's been extended from March 23 to March 24. Seems a very elementary basic control, particularly if you have changes in staff, just a list of reconciliations and when they should be performed. So I was a little bit surprised why that's been delayed. And probably also tied in that, sorry, is the mentioned annual, it's rather akin to that. Do we only do a hard close once a year, or is there a quarterly hard close of books or monthly? It's not raised by this issue, but it's just a general question.
Yeah, right. So on the first question, it was not just the financial reconciliations, it was outside of the finance area too, hence why that deadline's been extended. So we pick up the key financial system reconciliations as part of the regular audit work that we do in that area. I think I need to defer to Graham on the frequency of those reconciliations.
Yeah, the reconciliation. Sorry, Catherine. Sorry, Chair. The reconciliations vary, so some will be done more often. Some where the changes are less frequent will be less often. In terms of your question about a hard close, we only do a full hard close once a year.
Terrible to say, I don't think that's good practice at all, really. You really ought to be doing something quarterly at least. Then it does flush out any issues, and that aids being able to close the books on a timely basis, and probably helps with annual report preparation and things like that. I know it's a resource issue, Graham, but that's probably fairly concerning.
I'd be happy to get half an hour with you and discuss the sort of activity you feel would add value, and we can see whether actually we do some of that. It's just not a hard close. So very happy to have a bit of time and chat you through and discuss. If there's some things we can implement that make sense, we can certainly consider them.
Happy to help out. Yeah, no problem.
Okay, that sounds good. I mean, it might just be a question of what we call things, and that actually, you know, the close is not what you call a hard close, etc. But yeah, we can set that up. Okay. Any other points from anyone? I just want to check on page 75 where we've got the summary of where we are with each of the audits. So where the status column is blank, those are due for this quarter, presumably. Are there any concerns that you have that you may not be able to complete all of the plan within the year?
Where they're blank, they are yet to be started. There has been some variation in the plan during the course of the year, where, for example, on the company's audit, there was an external inspection taking place. So we were waiting for the outcome of that so we can actually add value and not just duplicate what's already been done. And in its place, a procurement audit has come in. So when I do my annual report, I'll be showing those movements in and out of the plan, so you can reconcile as to where we're at.
Thank you very much. I don't think there's any other questions on that item, so we'll move on to the internal audit plan. So just to remind members, obviously we've just been talking about the risk register. So one of our roles is to look at the plan and think, well, does this adequately cover the risks from our point of view? It is the head of internal audit's plan. Catherine owns the plan and her team own the plan, but obviously it's our role to challenge and scrutinise where appropriate. So Catherine, did you want to introduce the item?
Yes, thank you. So the agenda item, this covers the 24-25 internal audit plan, the strategy, and also the internal audit charter. So I've split the report into two parts in terms of my presentation. So the first part, Appendix A and A1, is the internal audit strategy and plan. So the strategy explains the approach to internal audit and investigation service work for the coming financial year. And the work in the plan is aimed at informing the head of internal audit's annual opinion on the governance, risk management and internal control framework. So in preparing the plan and the strategy, I've taken account of guidance from our accountancy and audit bodies, networking groups that I'm involved in, and I've used the corporate risk register to inform the audit plan wherever possible. And this is to demonstrate we're focusing on the key risks to the council. I've also attended directorate management team meetings and CLT to discuss corporate and directorates risks and priorities, and to identify where audit can assist and add value. And we're also focusing obviously on the current financial climate that's affecting all local authorities at the moment. I have to say directorate management teams and CLT were very engaged in the process. It was very positive. We came up with quite a list of audits, but obviously we had to prioritise them and balance them with the available resources. So in terms of the strategy in more detail, we try to audit the risks on a 3-year cycle, but obviously key corporate risk 1 is the most important one based on budget and financial resilience. So we're intending to undertake audit work in that area every year over 3 years. And the other key corporate risks we'll be doing on a 3-year cycle, so one in every 3 years. I'll just mention as well that the top 4 corporate risks that Susan mentioned in the previous report, that's key corporate risk 1, 5, 7 and 8. We have provision in the audit plan this year to cover those because in terms of likelihood and impact, the current assessment is very high. So we felt we needed to do audit work on all of those. And as well as focusing on key corporate risks and key operational risks, there are other elements in the audit plan that all help to form the internal audit annual opinion. And those include the governance building blocks work that we do, risk management, fraud and investigations. We also have provision for auditor judgment, where we feel as auditors we need to focus some audit work. And we've got a small element in there for advice and contingency. So Appendix A1, which is pages 97 to 101, shows the proposed work plan areas for 24-25. And the intention, as I say, is to have a sufficient range of coverage to form that head of internal audit opinion. So the recommendation is that Audit Committee review and scrutinise the internal audit strategy and plan. I'm going to pause there because there is a second part to the report on the internal audit charter, but I thought I'll take any questions on the plan first of all.
Thank you, Catherine. Sandeep.
One of the things I noticed that I didn't see a particular focus on procurement, and given the conversations we've had today, both with regard to practices, savings, and then the compliance changes, I would have expected procurement to be a dedicated focus somewhere. Has there been any thought around that?
Yes, it's in the audit plan for this year because of the new Procurement Act coming in and things need to be in place by October next year. This is where I mentioned earlier, we've deferred an audit on the governance of companies at the moment, and we've inserted the procurement audit instead. So work is actually in progress at the moment. We're scoping the work and we're starting that.
Okay, so
as we speak.
Have I missed it? Is it on?
It's in the progress report, so it'll be in the previous progress report, in the table of audit.
That procurement and commissioning. That's page 76.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Yeah, page 76.
Okay. Apologies. Okay, but it's a focus for this year, you said.
Yes, so if you see page 76, I've got it in there as a new, it's in key operational risks, second one down. And that's been a new audit to take account of the new legislation.
Oh, yes. Okay, thank you.
Other points, Stephen?
Thank you. Thank you, Catherine, for this. I don't know whether it might come under the procurement audit or under your governance building blocks contract audit, which is proposed. But what's occurred to me is that a key thing which affects vulnerable residents in the borough is where the council might be responsible for adaptations to properties to make them more fit for purpose and people with their changing needs and so on. And I wonder whether in one of these, whichever one it fits in most suitably, you could consider how we measure customer satisfaction with that in terms of, do we achieve the end result that we were aiming for? And are there ways in which we might be able to improve efficiency? And what I'm thinking about with that is, you've got supplier engagement, you've got contractor working in the client's premises, and then you've got sort of trying to mix trades together and get things done to a certain standard. And then have we achieved what the professional, because presumably somebody would have said this is what needs doing in the first place. So I'm not technically minded in all of this stuff, but to make sure that we've actually achieved the outcome, we've achieved value for money, and we've got closed loop certainty around whatever the objectives was we've achieved, and the client is satisfied with the outcomes, and we've still delivered value for money for the council for all of those processes, and that it's acting very efficiently, because every time you have to go back and maybe redo things, that's a loss of efficiency, loss of money, and it also ties up time, and time ultimately when you're using professionals is money anyway. Did that make any sense whatsoever?
Yes, it did. No, it was an audit that we used to have in our audit plan as a specific audit, but with the move to the risk register and linking in with there, it's an area that hadn't flushed up, as a key corporate risk as such. I can take your comments on board and, can see if it would fit into any of those, as an arm of the risk.
I think I would encourage you to look at it and maybe think about how it could be included. And that would be brilliant if you could find a way of shoehorning it in somewhere. I'd really appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you.
So if we could have that as an action to consider it.
Will do.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Other comments or questions? Mike?
I think really just to confirm, I think the way you've decided on the audit and the approach works really well. The high risk areas do every year. The lesser risk areas do on a rotation basis every 3 years. You've just got to make sure you do cover them in that 3-year cycle. And I think that really works well. Thank you.
And it's pleasing to hear the engagement with the senior team as well, that's been productive. So that's working well. Sorry, did someone else have their hand up?
Yes, I said it previously, but I'm going to say it again. So every year we're going to look at the budget and the financial resources as an audit, but we've identified 4 major risks to the council. Key one being cybersecurity, because no internet, no interconnectivity, nothing happens. That is a massive risk that I think many corporates and possibly the local authorities have not appreciated the impact any major outage would refer. Whether it's somebody putting a JCB through an essential cable in the street or cyber attack or whatever it is, that is really, really critical to the ability of the whole thing to perform. So I'm slightly surprised there isn't going to be a greater emphasis on that. But also the ability for the send issue to completely overwhelm the council's finances. I appreciate it's been audited this year, but I'm surprised that isn't going to get a look-see each subsequent year as well. I just wondered whether or not, we look at the budget every year, but these other 3 key risks are not being, should they be, or even if it's a light touch, with a view. Thank you.
I think the other thing is as well, we're planning ahead, but the risk register is quite, risks come in and move out all the time. So in a year's time, it might be different again. So this is the best approach, given the resources that we've got, to be able to ensure that we do have some coverage of all the risks every year. And I think it will also depend on the outcomes of those audits. So we do have those, the budget, financial resilience, and those 4 really high risk ones this year. And if we felt, it was uncontrolled and needed more work when we're doing the planning exercise next year, that's something we would take into account.
Any other comments or questions on that part? Okay, if we move on to the charter part, did you want to introduce that?
Yes, so just briefly, the Internal Audit Charter, which is its Appendix 2, pages 103 to 108. This is a terms of reference for internal audit, and I know it's come to the committee alongside the audit planning in previous years too. This is just to remind Audit Committee of our roles and responsibilities. And it's subject to an annual refresh to ensure that we comply still with the public sector internal audit standards. You will remember that back in July, we had an external review by CIPFA of the Internal Audit and Investigation Service, and they did look at the audit charter as part of that process, and they did confirm it contains all the key components in there. So since that external assessment back in July, there's just been some very minor changes to the year, for example, cosmetic changes. So I'm just presenting the charter for your approval this evening.
Thank you. Did anyone have any comments on it? Sorry, David.
Yeah, so something may have happened to my brain, but looking back at the last year's charter as presented, we made a number of changes to make it more robust. Those changes have not been included in this year's. So the charter we're approving here is not the same as one we approved last year.
The one last year would have had your changes taken into account.
Correct.
And then
those changes are missing from this year's.
Are they?
Yes, this is the version you're presenting here is the old pre-23-24 version, as far as I can tell. So all of the changes I've checked that were tracked in the previous presentation have been omitted from this version of the charter.
I'll need to go back and check that then.
So what I propose we do then in that case is that we go for a vote on approving it subject to reintroducing the changes that
subject to it being
is that okay with everyone as a proposal to move this forward? Is that all right with you, Catherine? Yeah. Okay.
No.
Yeah.
No, thank you.
Okay, so can I see all those in favour of approving the charter subject to the changes we previously made being added back in? Thank you. Anyone against? No. Thank you very much. Thank you, Catherine. Okay, so the next item is the Audit Committee effectiveness self-assessment. Andrew, or who's introducing this one? Paul. Yeah.
So you'll recall last year for the first time we did an assessment of the Audit Committee against the CIPFA standards and went through their self-assessment good practice guide. We've updated that for this year as shown in the report. Essentially, we've demonstrated a significant improvement in a number of areas across the board. So our overall score has gone from 162 to 179 out of 200 in the scoring. In terms of how we've achieved that, that's detailed in the analysis of the issues on page 110. Also in there is an action plan to deal with the any of the shortfalls that we found and how we're going to move those forward, going on to page 111. This is obviously sensitive from officers and our view of the world, but we'd be glad to hear your comments and input as a committee.
Thank you, Paul. And Peter?
Yeah, the key one is number 20 about obtaining feedback. So that sort of stuck out as being less than positive. So has the committee obtained positive feedback on its performance from those interacting with the committee or relying on its work? So is that score come to by talking to people who come to the committee meetings or rely on our work, and how's that feedback given, and what's the plan to improve on that?
So at the moment, we haven't formally collected that feedback. So that's what we want to introduce, is a mechanism of formally collecting that information, so that you're able to come to a judgment to receive that feedback.
So sorry, I read that as being we had poor feedback from our stakeholders. It's because we're not gathering any feedback at all. But fair enough. Okay.
So I think that's one of the key actions that we'll take forward, is to do that. I do think sometimes that's difficult, though, because not everyone knows what the purpose of an audit committee is. So sometimes that feedback is quite hard to get. But I think if we draw the net quite widely, we should be able to get some useful feedback, hopefully, on our performance overall. Mike, did you have a point?
Be interesting what EY's feedback would be after the hard time me in particular gave them earlier on. Totally justified. They're not online now, are they? On page 114, number 8, again, we've got a similar moderate improvement. I wondered, what are the improvements we need to get to a higher rating, and what are we doing about it? Okay.
There's an item on the agenda about the annual report, and it's included in the annual report. So that should address that today.
Any other points? So are we in general agreement with that assessment? I think there have been some improvements, but I think it's, particularly at this time when things are so challenging for local authorities, we should always be looking at where we can improve and how we can do things better. So I think that's a useful exercise, and thanks for the work that's gone into it. Okay, thank you. So the next item is assurance mapping. And so this is a kind of a first draft of an assurance map. So is this you as well, Paul? Yeah.
Hi. So essentially, the purpose of an assurance map is to support the committee in getting that global view of the assurance that it receives. Part of our conversation earlier with Catherine was around the internal audit assurance that you provided, and the external audit assurance provided by EY, and how those interact. And one of the attempts of an assurance map is to be able to provide that all in a single view. So if you look at the diagram on, is it 1, 2, 3? Yes, it's nicely in the wrong part. This is based on the LGA components of improvement in insurance in local government, which attempts to map the sources of assurance for a generic local authority. This work, we've essentially gone through and looked at where we are in relation to those, and attempted to map it out for you. And the idea being that you can see where that assurance is coming from and where it is. I'd be very keen to receive your feedback on how I can enhance this and give it a further level of detail. I know from experience with working with other people doing assurance maps that this can be a very resource intensive activity, and I'm very keen to get your feedback so that I'm providing you with value and not wasting time that's not going to add any value to you as a committee, because you're the primary consumer of this assurance map. So I would just essentially, to give you some idea of what this looks like, to talk about probably the thing in the blue grey box in the top left hand corner is some of the things where we're getting you receive assurance on. That is in terms of the sit for solace delivering good governance in local government. You see the local code of corporate governance on an annual basis, which we update and provide to you, and that before it goes on to council. In terms of the public sector internal audit standards, Catherine mentioned it earlier, we have the external quality assurance review every 5 years that you receive, and every year Catherine does a self-assessment as part of our head of internal audit assurance process. In terms of local government access to information. We have performance indicators around reporting incident breaches to the ICO, and any ICO breaches would be brought to yourselves. Obviously, we have the national performance standards that are being developed and reported through Oflog, and that covers the Information Commissioner's Office. Essentially, for each one of those, there's a way of demonstrating what assurances you have, what frequency they occur, and who provides them, and a sense of what those assurance providers are telling you. Unfortunately, there's no comprehensive agreed scale of assurance across the sector. So Ofsted doesn't have the same assurance framework as the Care Quality Commission, but what I'm attempting or planning to do is to give it some sort of crude and rudimentary RAG status to be able to, for you to be able to say, you know, these are vaguely in the area of equivalence across the piece. So that's the assurance map and where I've got to. I'd be very grateful for any input that you have in terms of how we take this forward, where it's going to be useful for you.
Thank you, Paul. Comments from members? Peter.
In the purple box in the middle, where you've got organisational control framework, and then you've got an arrow from the full council. So it talks about constitution and decision making. So one of the surprises among fairly new council, where the full council voted by majority for a motion, but that wasn't binding on the council, or the executive, or the officers to implement. That was quite surprising. So that box there, in terms of organisation framework, has decision making. So clearly, the council, the full council, is not a decision making body if what decisions they make can be overruled by the executive.
I'll defer to the monitoring officer.
Let me have a go at that. So what I would say is the council's constitution, which is effectively its rules of engagement, rules of procedure, that is the council's. It's down to individual councillors to vote for changes in that constitution in terms of how the council operates. I take the point about, I understand the point you're making about that particular motion. But we are, and there will be a report to council in March. We are, I think, as members have realised, we're going through a fundamental review of the constitution at the moment. But I think, as Paul says, the constitution is just one of the many elements of the assurance framework in a local authority. The one thing I'd add just as well to what Paul said is that this is very much early days. But I think obviously this is the last meeting of the committee in this municipal year. But as the committee meets again in the start of next year, this map is an opportunity to sort of help shape the work programme for the committee moving forwards, to make sure that you're covering all those different aspects of different types of assurance across the council.
Thank you, Mike, and then Stephen.
Despite our conversation with EY earlier on, I mentioned that again. Should external audit feature here if we're looking at assurance and things like that?
Yeah, they should. I would put them under other assurance providers in that grey box there, but I think probably should be explicit that external audit is one of those external providers.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think internal audit and external audit should be more explicitly mentioned on here because they're just such key sources of assurance for us. So it should sort of come out more strongly, I would say. Stephen?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, again, I thought this was a good report. I think from my perspective on this being sort of, well, first year on the committee and that, what I'm pleased about here is we seem to be making sustainable incremental improvements, and I think that's a good thing. So that's really positive. So I'm really pleased that that's the direction of travel, because you don't want to make a big leap and then find that you can't maintain it. You want to be able to maintain that improvement. So I'm pleased with that. The question I've got, and this is probably just my own ignorance, but for the millions that are watching us at home, so that they can know as well, not just for my benefit, what does AGS stand for, please?
Annual governance statement.
Right, thank you very much.
Okay. I just had a few comments on this. I think it's a really good exercise, and I like Andrew's thought about us, or the committee using it as a way of making sure we get assurance from all the relevant areas. I think in terms of the layout, I did struggle with it a little bit. And I appreciate it's good to have it all on one page and sort of not much clutter and easy to read. But for example, where we've got at the bottom, first line of defence, second line of, I know you explained that in the paper. I think if you're just looking at this, most people won't understand what that means. And that, I guess that ties into the audit point, which audit isn't sort of explicitly mentioned. And then the other thing that just confused me a little bit was the arrows, I think, because we need to look at which areas are giving assurance to other areas, which areas are we gaining assurance from. And with those arrows, I didn't quite understand what the arrows signified, I suppose, in terms of the assurance going in different sort of directions. The other observation was the media and public box seemed fairly insignificant up on the left, and actually the public element of scrutiny of the council perhaps should be more prominent. I mean, that's not to say that I don't think it's good work and we can build on it, but those were my observations on it. So I don't know if it's useful for us to have a separate meeting to talk about how we might change it and make it more and more useful over time. But thank you for doing it. So I think it's a good starting point, and it'd be a useful tool for us. Any other points before we move on? No? Okay, thank you for that. And the last item we have is the Audit Committee annual report. Who is introducing that? Is that Andrew? Yeah.
Yes, so this is very much a draft report this evening in front of you, that the chair will present to council next month. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. You do this every year, but as we looked at in the item about the Audit Committee self-assessment, there's a couple of points there that we need to emphasise. I should also bring to your attention that Catherine quite rightly pointed out to me that there is on page 136, there are two areas this year of limited assurance, information governance and right to buy. So those will be added in. And I guess probably perhaps the most significant parts that needs to be added in, and it's referenced in bold there on page 135 under external audit, is obviously there's some narrative to add on the back of this evening's meeting and the conclusions that you drew from this evening. Those are the headlines, but yeah, very happy to take any further comments, and I will take those comments and work with the chair to get a version that you're comfortable to put in front of full council next month.
Thank you, Andrew. Comments from the committee, Peter.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the introduction written by yourself, just in the top of the second paragraph, I think it would be good at this point to clarify that the members of the committee include our two independent members, because I think today we've sort of seen the value that they add. So if we can perhaps, I know it's mentioned a little bit later on, but to talk about it's a mixture of councillors and independent members who bring their expertise.
Yeah, I think we can add that. It is mentioned further down in that, but yes, I think we can add that at the outset because it is very valuable. Yeah, agreed. Yeah. Mike.
Just to pick on the point that Andrew made, that the latest position following our meeting tonight about the external audit, it does need to very clearly express our displeasure, and also the fact that the council's finances have been looked after, just with the exception of the valuation, whatever the other items are. Can't be satisfied, the auditors aren't going to bother to do that bit.
Yeah, I think you're right. We will need some careful wording on there to make sure that it's clear what our views are, but also that we don't set hairs running in terms of the financial position. Yeah. Any other points on the report? Are we happy that that's a good reflection of the committee? Yeah, Stephen?
It's not exactly a comment on the report, but there are no further agenda items. So I just wanted to say thank you for the way that you've been chairing this committee for the last year. I speak on all of us in recognising that it's been a really enjoyable committee to serve on. It's been my first year on any committee, and I just wanted to recognise that it's been great. I've really enjoyed being on this committee, and I've really appreciated the way that you've chaired it. Thank you. And everyone else for their participation.
Well, that's very kind. Yeah, I was going to also provide my thanks at the end. I think we're at the end of our items now. So thank you all for your contributions. Thank you to our independent members. And, you know, you've all made some really good contributions during the year. I would thank the external auditors, but they've disappeared. But they're professional at all times, and we do thank them for their contributions. Thanks to Catherine for all of the excellent work that she does and her team. I don't really know how you fit all of those audits in. You must work very, very hard. And lastly, just to thank all of the officers. I think we're very well supported on this committee, so thank you for all the work that you put in to make it as useful and effective as it can be. So thank you very much, everyone. We'll close the meeting there. Thank you.